My name is Renata Osley. I'm 31 years old, and on the morning of my wedding, I made a phone call that I have never once regretted. I was standing in the bridal suite of the most beautiful venue I had ever been inside. Original hardwood floors, October light coming through windows that were older than my grandparents. And I was holding my phone with both hands, still in my wedding dress. And I was asking my photographer if he could change the color of a dress in every single photo it appeared in. Not my dress, someone else's. He said yes. I told him what color I wanted, and then I put the phone down, looked at myself in the mirror, put in my grandmother's pearl earrings, and got married. If you want to understand why I made that call, and why I would make it again tomorrow without hesitating, I need to take you back a little further. Before I do, I want to say something to you directly. If you found this video, I don't think it was an accident. I think you've probably been in a version of this room before. Maybe not a bridal suite, maybe not anything that dramatic, but a room where someone did something that was so clearly intentional, so precisely aimed at you, and everyone around you just looked away and said nothing. And you smiled, because that's what you do. Because you learned that making a scene was somehow worse than absorbing the thing that was done to you. If that's you, stay with me. Hit like, subscribe so you get the rest of this. Because this story isn't over in part 1, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. You know who I mean. Okay, let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, in a house with a craftsman porch and a father who coached cross-country and a mother who made quilts she never sold. We weren't wealthy. We weren't struggling either. We owned our house, we took one road trip every summer, and we didn't fight much. But when we did, it mattered. My dad is a high school art teacher who still talks about color theory at the dinner table. My mom is the kind of woman who will silently appear beside you when you're doing something difficult and just stay there until it's done. I have an older brother named Curtis and a younger sister Blythe, who is honestly the funniest person I know. The emotional atmosphere of that house was warm, practical, a little quiet. You didn't dwell on things. You fixed what you could and you moved forward. What I took from that is a gift and a flaw in roughly equal measure. I am extremely good at moving forward. I am not always good at stopping first to say, that thing that just happened, that was wrong. Someone needs to know it was wrong. There is one memory I keep coming back to. I was 9 years old. I had a spring recital at my elementary school. I was in the choir, nothing extraordinary, but it was my night. I wore a white lace dress that my mom had ironed twice, and my grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman named Estelle who had strong opinions about everything and softened them for no one, showed up in a floor-length cream dress. Not white, technically, but in that lighting, in those photos, photographed almost identically to mine. Nobody said anything. My mom squeezed my hand and said, "Just ignore it, sweetheart." I smiled through the whole performance. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. I remember standing on that risers thinking, this is supposed to be my night, and I smiled some more. I have never made peace with that memory. I didn't know that until recently, but I hadn't. I studied graphic design at UNC Asheville on a partial merit scholarship, paid the rest through work study at the campus print lab and weekend shifts at a coffee roaster downtown, where I knew every regular by their order by the end of the first month. I graduated in 3.5 years, moved to Charlotte, worked my way up at a brand consultancy called Arrowwood Creative, where I now lead visual identity work for 3 anchor clients and manage one junior designer who is sharper than I was at her age. I built my life without a blueprint and without a net. I don't say that for sympathy, I say it because it matters for the story. I had been in Charlotte about a year when I met Devin Marchetti at a client pitch meeting. He was the account lead, I was the designer. I made a joke during the presentation about negative space, the kind of joke that lands with exactly one type of person in the room, and he was the one who laughed. He remembered my coffee order the following week without asking. He's 33, he has dark eyes and a charcoal gray suit he wears like he was born in it, and he says what he means in a way that I didn't know I had been missing until I was around it. I knew he came with a family, everyone does. He had told me about his mother early, not as a warning exactly, more as a weather report. She's a lot, he said. She loves hard. She lost my dad 14 months before our wedding. A cardiac event, sudden, no warning. And since then, she orbits me a little more closely. He said it the way you described the sun. Present, non-negotiable. Her name is Claudette Marchetti. She is 59 years old and she has a silver bob she keeps precisely one length and dark eyes that miss nothing. She is the kind of woman who arrives early to everything, contributes to everything, and then uses every contribution as a quiet claim to authority. She brought food to our house for 6 months after Devin and I moved in together. Beautiful food, honestly. Enormous amounts of it. And every time she set something down on our counter, she would rearrange something nearby. Just slightly. Just enough that you'd notice later and not be sure if you imagined it. She has never been openly cruel to me. That's the thing I want you to understand. There was no screaming, no name-calling, no dramatic confrontation over a holiday dinner. It was always smaller than that. It was the way she would address all of her son's friends by name and then turn to me and say, "Your little friend." The way she would look at something I had done to our home, a print I'd chosen, a color on the wall, and say, Devin always liked things a certain way, as if I had walked into a museum and moved the paintings. The way she would tell stories at family dinners where Devin was the center of every one and I was a stage direction. I absorbed all of it. I moved forward. I was the easy one. I was practical, like I'd been raised to be. The morning of October 14th, I was in the bridal suite 47 minutes before the ceremony. I had a timeline printed and laminated. I had a backup timeline on my phone. Blythe was pinning a loose section of my updo and telling me a story about Devin's college roommate and a bread roll that I was going to ask her to finish later. Her phone buzzed. Her hands went still on my hair. I watched her face in the mirror before I looked at my own. "Hey," she said. Not a story starter, a landing. She turned the phone around. It was a photo from the lobby, taken by Devin's cousin Gina, who is constitutionally incapable of withholding information. Blurry from distance, 30 feet at least, but clear enough. Floor length, chiffon, silver beading at the neckline catching the venue light. White. Not ivory, not champagne, not a well-intentioned misread of the dress code. White. I sat with it for 3 full seconds. I could feel the 9-year-old at the recital, standing on those risers, cheeks aching from smiling. I could feel every squeeze of my mother's hand. Every time I had moved forward without stopping to say, that was wrong. I set down the earring I was holding. I hadn't realized I was gripping it. "That's a choice," I said. "That is absolutely a choice," Blythe said. I picked the earring back up, I put it in, and I thought about what a photographer sees. I thought about what lives in photographs. I thought about my wedding album sitting on a shelf 20 years from now, and inside it, on the most important day of my life, a second white dress. A quiet reminder, permanently developed, that someone had decided to be present in a way I couldn't argue with and couldn't undo. Except, I'm a graphic designer. "I need Marcus's number," I said. Marcus answered on the second ring. He was in the parking lot doing a final run-through of his shot list. That's the kind of photographer he is. The kind who has already walked every room twice before the first guest arrives. He heard my name on the caller ID and assumed logistics. He answered easy, like someone who has managed 100 wedding morning questions and is not worried about this one. "Renata, everything okay?" I want to tell you what it felt like to say the next thing out loud, because I had been turning it over in my head for about 4 minutes at that point, and in those 4 minutes it had gone from impulse to decision, and the decision had a shape to it that felt less like revenge and more like accuracy, like correcting a record. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to tell me if it's possible before I decide whether I want to do it." He went quiet in a particular way, not confused, attentive. "Devin's mother is here. She's wearing white. Floor-length white chiffon, silver beading at the neckline." I paused. "If you photograph her today, and you will because she will make sure you do, Can you edit the dress to a different color in post? 2 seconds of silence. Technically, yes, without question. What color would take the least time, I said, and look the most honest? There was something in that word that he understood immediately. Honest, not dramatic, not punishing. Honest, meaning a color that could not be mistaken for something accidental. A color that could not be explained away as ivory or champagne or a trick of the lighting. Something that could not be confused for anything close to white, he said. Neon green, I said. He made a sound. Not a laugh exactly, something closer to recognition. Like he had been waiting for someone to say a thing like this for a long time. Neon green, he confirmed. Every photo she appears in. I want my dress to be the only white dress in my wedding album. Done, he said. And I believed him. I want to stop here for a second because I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking, that's petty, Renata. You might be thinking, why didn't you just go talk to her? Why didn't you tell Devin? Why didn't you pull her aside and have an adult conversation about what she was doing and why it wasn't okay? And here's what I want to ask you, genuinely, not rhetorically, because I think about this a lot. Have you ever been in a situation where the thing that was done to you was so perfectly constructed that confronting it directly would make you look worse than the person who did it? Where the damage was done with a kind of precision that left no fingerprints? Where if you walked up to that person and said, I know what you're doing, they could tilt their head and say, I have absolutely no idea what you mean. And every person in the room would believe them over you. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one and I genuinely want to know. Because I think more people have stood in that specific hallway than ever talk about it. Because that's where I was standing. Claudette Marchetti had not done anything you could name in a sentence to another adult and have it land the way it deserved to. She had worn a dress to a wedding. She had made a choice. And if I had gone down to that lobby and said something, I would have been the hysterical bride who caused a scene on her own wedding day. She would have been the grieving widow who just wanted to look nice for her son. So I didn't go to the lobby. I didn't call Devin. I went back to the vanity, I let Blythe finish my hair, and I listened to the end of the bread roll story, which was worth it. Devin came to the bridal suite door at 1:30. We had planned this together. Not a first look, just a hand through the door, a voice, a reminder that the person on the other side of all of this was the reason for all of this. I pressed my palm against his through the door frame and he said, "Hi," in a way that is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't heard it. Just that one word, carrying everything. I said hi back. He asked if I was okay. I said I was more than okay. I meant it completely. I made a decision in that moment, his hand warm against mine through the frame of the door. I was not going to let this live inside our vows. Whatever needed to be addressed would be addressed, but not today. Not in the middle of the words that mattered most. I was going to get married, and I was going to be present for every second of it, and Claudette's dress was going to be handled in the background by a man with a very good eye for color in post-production. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock. October light through original windows, hardwood floors that have held 100 years of weight. I walked myself down the aisle, a choice Devin and I made together, which Claudette had opinions about that no one requested. I held my own bouquet, pale blush roses and dried eucalyptus that I had specified in writing with the florist 4 months earlier, and I walked at my own pace, and I felt, for the first time in the entire planning of this wedding, completely unhurried. Devin cried, left corner of his left eye just slightly, the way men cry when they're trying not to. Marcus caught it from 15 feet back with the longer lens. I know because I've seen the photo, and it is one of the best photographs I've ever seen in my life, and I am a graphic designer who looks at images for a living. I didn't cry during the vows. People were surprised by that later. But here's the thing. I wasn't holding anything back. I wasn't composed because I was suppressing something. I was composed because I was completely, entirely certain. There was nothing left to be uncertain about. I looked at Devin and I said my words like I meant them, because I meant every single one of them. And that is not a feeling that makes you cry. That is a feeling that makes you go still. Claudette was in the third row, right side. I saw her when I reached the altar and turned. White chiffon, silver beading, opera pearls at her throat. She was sitting perfectly upright, shoulders back, the posture of a woman who has never once in her life been unsure of her right to occupy a space. She looked at me with something I can only describe as warmth. And this is the part that took me the longest to understand. It was real. She genuinely loves her son. She was genuinely moved by the ceremony. She cried before I reached the altar, which Devin's Aunt Patricia told me about afterward, with an expression I couldn't quite read. The love is real. The dress was also real. Both things are true. Marcus shot the ceremony from 3 positions. He told me later he captured approximately 460 images across the full day. In 31 of them, Claudette Marchetti is visible. In 22 of those 31, the white chiffon dress is clearly, fully, unambiguously present. He did not miss a single one. At the reception, I was standing near the entrance to the main hall, Devin's hand at the small of my back, greeting people as they moved through from the cocktail hour. I was laughing at something Blythe had said. I was holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched. I was, genuinely, having the night of my life. And then I passed the coat room. I wasn't trying to overhear anything. I was cutting through on the way to the head table, and the door was half open, and I heard Devin's Aunt Patricia, his father's sister, a woman from Yonkers who says exactly what she thinks at exactly the volume she thinks it, say the word brazen to at least 3 people. Not about me. I kept walking. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back through the door. I filed it the way I file everything. I thought, good, someone else sees it. And then I walked to the head table and sat down next to my husband and ate the best meal I've had in years. At 7:15, Claudette found me at the edge of the dance floor. She touched my arm. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something powdery and deliberate, and she said, "You look beautiful." And I want to tell you again, because it matters. She meant it. It was not a performance. Her eyes were soft and her voice was soft, and for 1 second she was just a woman at her son's wedding, genuinely moved. "I hope you know," she said, "how much this family loves you." I looked at her. I looked at the dress. I looked back at her face. "Thank you, Claudette," I said. "I'm so glad you're here." I meant that too. I meant it the way you mean something when you already know the end of the story. Marcus delivered the gallery 6 days later. He had expedited it because I asked, and because he understood, without me having to explain further, why the timeline mattered. He sent a single text at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning. "Gallery is live. Take your time with it." I was at the kitchen table. Devin had already left for work. I was still in my robe, both hands around a coffee mug, and the house had that particular Tuesday morning quiet that feels different from weekend quiet. More honest somehow, less performed. I opened the laptop. I clicked the link. The first image was the venue exterior, October light on old brick. I felt my chest do something complicated. I scrolled slowly. The ceremony setup, chairs in soft rows, eucalyptus draped along the ends, Blythe laughing at something off camera during the processional, her dusty sage dress catching the window light. Devin at the altar with his hands clasped in front of him and his eyes doing the thing they do when he is trying to hold himself together. The wide shot of me coming down the aisle, ivory satin, no one beside me, the original hardwood floors stretching out ahead, and I looked at that image for a long time because I looked like someone who knew exactly where she was going. And then, third row, right side, neon green. I want to describe it precisely because precision matters here. Marcus had preserved everything, the chiffon texture, the way the fabric moved, the silver beading still catching the light along the neckline, the opera pearls still gleaming at the throat. He had changed only the color, and the color he had changed it to was the specific, blazing, unambiguous green of a highlighter marker. The green of safety vests. The green that exists for the sole purpose of being impossible to overlook and impossible to mistake for anything else. In the context of an October wedding, ivory satin, dusty sage, champagne, candlelight, warm wood, it was like a flare had gone off in the third row. I sat with the gallery open for a long time. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I felt something I'm still working on naming. Something in the neighborhood of justice, but quieter than that. More like when you've been carrying something crooked for a long time and you finally set it down level. The relief isn't loud. It just is. I called Blythe. "They're here," I said. "And?" "She's green." Blythe made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and landed as something entirely its own. Then she said, very quietly, "Good." I want to tell you about the moment I showed Devin, because this is the part of the story that people ask about most when I tell it. Not the dress, not the edit, not Marcus and his impeccable professional composure in that parking lot conversation. They ask about Devin. And honestly, so did I. For 6 days while I was waiting for the gallery, I turned it over. I thought about who he is, what he carries, the specific geography of his loyalty. I thought about all the times in 4 years that I had absorbed something quietly, because naming it would have required him to do something he wasn't ready to do. I thought about the fact that I loved him, fully, without reservation, and that loving someone fully does not mean you cannot also see them clearly. That evening, I opened the laptop at the kitchen table and turned it toward him without saying anything. I just turned it toward him and waited. He scrolled. He reached the first image where Claudette was visible. He stopped. He went back 1 frame. He came forward again. He looked at the image for long enough that I could hear the refrigerator running. Then he closed the laptop. The kitchen was very quiet. "You did that," he said. "I did. Because of the dress. Because of the dress." He opened the laptop again. He looked at the image. His mother, in neon green chiffon, silver beading, opera pearls, in the 3rd row of our wedding ceremony, sitting perfectly upright with her shoulders back. And something moved through his face that I had never seen there before. It wasn't anger exactly. It was recognition. The specific expression of someone who has been not knowing something on purpose for a long time and has just run out of room to keep not knowing it. If you have ever loved someone enough to protect them from a truth about their own family, and I think some of you have, I think that's a very particular kind of exhaustion. Then you know the moment I'm describing. The moment the thing you've been quietly managing finally sits down at the table and refuses to leave. If this is landing somewhere real for you right now, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss where this goes, because we are not done yet. Not even close. This next part is the part that changed everything. He nodded, once, slowly, like something was being confirmed that had always been there waiting. "She knew what she was doing," he said, not a question. "Yes." He sat with that. I watched him sit with it. I didn't push. I have learned, from years of working in rooms where I have to let an idea land at its own speed, that the most important thing you can do after you say the true thing is to let there be silence. "She's going to find out," he said finally. "I know. And when she does," I said, "we'll deal with it. Together." I looked at him directly. "But I'm not taking it down, Devin. Those are my wedding photos." Something shifted in his face. Not defeat. That's not the right word. It was more like arrival. Like he had been traveling toward a particular understanding for a very long time and had just, quietly, gotten there. He reached across the table and took my hand. "They're ours," he said, "and they're perfect." Claudette found out 3 weeks later. It came through Gina. Of course it did. Gina is the family's circulatory system. Information moves through her the way blood moves through a body. Who had seen the photos in the shared wedding gallery that Devin and I had posted for family and friends. Gina sent a screenshot to someone. That someone showed Claudette. I don't know the exact moment she saw it. I know what happened after because Devin told me, because I asked him to tell me, and he did, fully, without managing it, which was itself something new. She called him. The call was long. There were tears. Real ones, I believe that. There was the phrase, I was trying to honor the day. There was, I don't know what I did to deserve this family treating me this way. There was the particular architecture of Claudette's distress, which I have come to understand is not manufactured. It is genuine. And it is also, simultaneously, a form of pressure. She feels things intensely, and she has learned, over 59 years, that her feelings move people. It is not a cynical strategy. It is just what she knows. Devin listened to all of it, and then he said, clearly, without hedging, in the voice he uses when he has made a decision and is done deliberating, that his mother had worn white to his wife's wedding. That his wife had handled it with more restraint than most people would have, and that if she wanted to have a real conversation about how they moved forward as a family, he and Renata were both open to that. Together. Claudette hung up. I was in the next room. I heard the call end. I came to the doorway and looked at him, and he looked at me, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then he said, I told her the truth. I know, I said. I should have been doing that for longer than I have. I crossed the room and sat next to him on the couch, and we stayed there for a while, without turning on anything, without picking up our phones, without filling the silence. Just sitting with the weight of what had just shifted between the three of us, and what it would take to figure out what came next. Here is what I know about Claudette Marchetti, and I want to say it clearly because I think it matters. She is not a villain. She is a woman who lost her husband 14 months before her eldest son's wedding. She is a woman who gave 35 years of herself to a family and structured her entire identity around being its center, and then watched that center migrate slowly toward a woman she didn't choose and couldn't control. She is a woman who, when she was 24 years old and standing in her own wedding photographs, had her own version of this story, her own cream-dressed mother-in-law, her own quietly absorbed humiliation, her own hand squeezed and nobody saying anything. I think she wore that dress to my wedding because somewhere in the unprocessed architecture of her grief, it felt like a claim, not a cruelty, a claim. I am still here. I am still the most important woman in this family. I was here first. That is a terrible reason to do what she did, and I can hold that, and hold her full humanity at the same time. I sat with that understanding in our kitchen on a Tuesday night, the laptop still open, the gallery still glowing, and I felt something underneath the exhaustion that I recognized from the end of very hard projects. The specific, quiet sensation of something having been completed. Not perfectly, not without cost, but done, honestly done, set down level. Claudette called back 4 days later. Devin took the call in the kitchen. I was in the second bedroom that I use as a home studio. Monitors on, a brand color palette open on one screen, my coffee going cold on the desk the way it always does when I'm actually working. And I could hear the low register of his voice through the wall, but not the words, which was exactly right. That call was his to have. I had said what I needed to say in the clearest visual language I knew. What happened next between a son and his mother was territory I was going to let him navigate at his own pace, with my full support and without my interference. The call lasted 41 minutes. I know because I checked the time when it started and when the house went quiet again. He knocked on the studio door and came in and sat on the small couch I keep in there for exactly this kind of moment. The kind where someone needs to be near you without needing anything specific from you. He looked tired, not defeated. Tired in the way that people look when they have done something genuinely hard and don't regret doing it. She's not ready to apologize, he said, not in the way that would mean something. Okay, I said, but she wants to have dinner, the three of us. She said she wants to understand you better. He paused, which I think means she wants to understand how to manage you better. I told her that if we had dinner, it would be a real conversation, not a performance. I turned my chair around to face him. "Do you want to have that dinner?" I asked. "I want to have the dinner that conversation might eventually become," he said. "I don't think we're there yet." I nodded. That was honest. I could work with honest. "Then we wait," I said, "and when she's ready for the real one, we'll show up." The natural consequences of what Claudette had done, and I want to be precise here because I did not cause any of what happened next. I did not make any calls. I did not engineer any outcomes. Those consequences arrived on their own, the way consequences from choices made in public always eventually do. Devin's Aunt Patricia, the woman from Yonkers who says what she thinks at the volume she thinks it, had apparently been saying it consistently since the reception. The courtroom conversation I had half overheard was not an isolated moment. It was the beginning of a longer, wider reckoning within the Marchetti extended family about a pattern that people had noticed for years and not named. The white dress was simply the moment that was too visible to explain away. 3 of Devin's cousins reached out to me separately in the weeks after the wedding. Not to relitigate anything, just to say they saw it, they were sorry, they were glad I was in the family. One of them, Devin's cousin from his father's side, a woman named Teresa who I had always liked but barely knew, sent me a voice message that I have listened to more than once. She said, "My Uncle Frank would have loved you. He would have thought you were exactly right for Devin. I just wanted you to know that someone who knew this family before you arrived would have welcomed you completely." I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store and listened to that message twice. And then I drove home, and I didn't say anything about it to Devin right away. I just carried it for a day, let it do what it needed to do. I told him that evening. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's right. He would have." We didn't talk about it further. We didn't need to. Blythe drove up from Asheville on a Saturday, the way she does when something has happened that is too large for a phone call. She brought kolaches from a bakery on the way and a very specific bottle of wine she had been saving for what she called the right complicated occasion, which I found both accurate and deeply funny. We sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours. We talked about the wedding, the dress, the photos, the call, the dinner that hadn't happened yet. We talked about our grandmother Estelle and the recital and the white lace costume and the way our mother had squeezed my hand and said, "Just ignore it," and whether "just ignore it" is a thing you say to protect your child or a thing you say because you don't know what else to do, and both of those things can be true. "She did the best she knew how," Blythe said about our mother. "I know," I said. "So did Estelle probably, in her own way." Blythe refilled both our glasses. "Are you going to do the dinner?" "Eventually," I said. "When it's real." She nodded. She knows me well enough to know that eventually, with me, is not avoidance, it is a calendar. There is something I wrote after all of this settled into its shape. Not a letter I sent, not to Claudette, not to anyone, something I wrote for myself in the notebook I keep on my nightstand that is technically for project ideas and is actually for everything else. I wrote, "The wedding photos are mine. Every image from that day is a record of something that actually happened. And what actually happened is that I married the person I chose, in the place I chose, in the dress I chose, surrounded by the people who showed up for me in the ways that mattered. All of that is true. All of that is documented. The other thing that is documented is a choice someone else made. I didn't put that choice there. I just made sure it was visible in the color it deserved." I showed it to Devin. He read it slowly, the way he reads things when he's taking them seriously. When he finished, he looked up and said, "That's exactly right." One sentence. Exactly right. That is the man I married. The dinner happened, eventually, on a Sunday evening 6 weeks after the wedding. Not at Claudette's house, not at ours. At a restaurant in Midtown Charlotte that Devin chose. Neutral ground, public enough to keep things measured, good enough food that there was always something else to talk about if the conversation needed a moment to breathe. Claudette wore a burgundy dress, I noticed. I didn't say anything about it. I think she chose it carefully. I think it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was going to get in that form, and I accepted it in the spirit it was offered. The conversation was not a resolution. I want to be honest about that, because I think there is a version of this story where I tell you that we sat down and she apologized fully and we cried and embraced and everything healed cleanly, and that would be a more satisfying story, and it would also be fiction. What actually happened was more like a beginning. She talked about Frank. She talked about how much she missed having a full table. She talked about Devin as a child, a story about him at 8 years old trying to rebuild a broken radio he found in the garage. And while she was telling it, she looked at him with an expression so unguarded that for a moment I saw exactly who she had been before everything calcified. I listened. I asked questions. I did not perform warmth I didn't feel, but I also did not withhold the warmth I did feel, because it was real, complicated and partial and real. At the end of the night in the parking lot, she touched my arm the same way she had at the reception. She said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "Thank you for calling back." She nodded. She got in her car. Devin and I drove home mostly in silence, the good kind, the kind that means everything that needed to be said was said and the rest can wait. The photograph hangs in our hallway now, the wide ceremony shot, me walking myself down the aisle in ivory satin, October light through original windows, Devin at the end of it in charcoal gray, the original hardwood floors, the eucalyptus along the chair ends. It is a beautiful photograph. Marcus did what he does, which is find the true moment and hold it still. In the third row, right side, a small figure in neon green chiffon, silver beading catching the light, opera pearls at the throat, shoulders perfectly back. I put it there on purpose, not as a monument to the conflict, not as a daily reminder of what was done. I put it there because it is honest, because everything in that image actually happened, and the photograph tells the truth about all of it. The love, the joy, the light, the hardwood floors, and the choice that someone made in the third row that I did not absorb quietly. Every morning when I pass it on the way to the kitchen, I feel something I've been trying to name for weeks now. It is not triumph. It is not anger. It is something quieter and more durable than either of those things. It is the feeling of having told the truth in the clearest language I knew. It is the feeling of being the author of my own story. My name is Renata Osley. I'm 31 years old, and the girl who stood on those risers at 9 years old, smiling so hard her cheeks ached, her white lace dress blurring into her grandmother's cream one in every photograph from that night, she finally did something about it. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely, not as a script line. I want to know. Has someone ever done something to you that was so precisely constructed that you couldn't name it out loud without sounding unreasonable? Something that lived in the gap between what actually happened and what anyone would believe if you described it. Something you absorbed quietly because the alternative seemed worse, and then carried longer than you should have. Leave it in the comments. Tell me as much or as little as you want. I read every single one, and I mean that. And I think the people in those comments read each other too, and sometimes that matters more than anything else. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt like something you needed to hear today, hit like, subscribe so you're here for the next one, and share this with someone who needs permission to stop absorbing things quietly. You know exactly who that person is. My name is Renata, I'm 31, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.